Shalom. This week's Torah portion is Parashat Shmini, beginning in Sefer Vayikra, the book of Leviticus, chapter 9, begins with the description that it's the 8th day following the week of the dedication ceremony for the establishment of the Tabernacle. And today, the 8th day, is in fact, according to our sages, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and it was on the 8th day that Moshe called to Aharon and to his children and to the elders of Israel. And this is the culmination of a week-long series of events that comprise the dedication ceremony of the establishment of the Tabernacle. This is going to lead to the resting of the divine presence in Israel. This is an incredible event. And as we read in these verses, in the beginning of Parashat Shmini, we understand that Hashem was very pleased. The fire descended from heaven, and literally all of Israel was a witness to God with their own eyes, to God's dwelling amongst them. So, and it was on the 8th day. This is the first day of the month of Nisan, the day that our sages describe as a day that was adorned with 10 crowns. It's the day of the beginning of the service of the Kohanim. From this point on, from this day on, only the Kohanim, the descendants of Aharon, were privileged to attend to the divine service in the tabernacle. This is the day of the priestly blessing, the day that fire descended from heaven. It's a day of just magnificent dimensions that so emphasize and amplify the unique relationship that Israel has with God. It's a day of tremendous spiritual fulfillment and ascent. And we can well imagine that all of those present were filled with tremendous excitement, enthusiasm, and a true kind of inner understanding of just how close they really were to God. So we read in the beginning of chapter 10 here in Parashat Shmini of the very difficult circumstances, the very untoward incident, the very moving account of the unauthorized offering that was brought by the two sons of Aharon, Nadav and Avihu, who brought a strange fire, as it's called by the verse. Chapter 10, verse Aleph, a strange fire that was not commanded by God, how they brought this offering and how a fire came forth from Hashem and consumed them. And Aharon, we read, was silent. He justified God's judgment, and Moshe explained, this is exactly what Hashem has instructed us, that he will be sanctified amongst those, in the midst of those who are closest to him. So this is a very enigmatic idea, the death of Nadav and Avihu, and there has been a tremendous amount of commentary that's been written about it, and some people have the impression that Nadav and Avihu were maybe kind of like rebels or upstarts. They were doing something that was maybe flippant or juvenile. They decided that they wanted to rebel against God, and they were men of some sort of ill disposition. They were not exactly educated properly. In other words, there are people who try to look at this and ascribe to the action of Nadav and Avihu some sort of act of irreligiosity. But the truth is, there is definitely a color and a texture and an understanding in the depths of the writings of our greatest sages that indicate exactly the opposite. That Nadav and Avihu were indeed very, very great men, extremely righteous, and that their entire motivation was out of tremendous enthusiasm to be as close to Hashem as possible. That they witnessed everything that we've been describing from the very beginning of the Parsha on the 8th day, on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, on that powerful day, the day of the completion and the erection of the Tabernacle. They witnessed Hashem's manifestation, they witnessed the fire coming down, and they wanted to draw as close as possible, and that this action that they took, however unauthorized, was indeed coming from the deepest wellsprings of their fervor for this kind of connection to the divine. And precisely because this is really the proper understanding of who Nadav and Avihu were, precisely because of that, there is so much that we can learn from what the Torah is really testifying to hear and what the lesson really is. Because many times a person feels justified in taking some sort of step that's not exactly within the parameters of what God tells us in the Torah. But there's oftentimes people that use expressions like, well, I know that it's right because I feel it in my heart. Or, God told me to do such and such. And that's a very popular expression. Of course, when someone has a direct hotline to God and claims that God is talking to them, it's kind of hard to argue with. But one of the really important things that the Torah is teaching us here is how important it is for our spiritual progression to reflect the borders and the parameters and the limitations of who we are, and how we have to move according to a gradual plan, exactly as Hashem lays out for us. Because there is such a problem that many people have of wanting things, and maybe coming from a very good place, maybe coming from a desire to be close to Hashem, to change the world, to change ourselves, to change other people, to change other people's perception of God, to sanctify God even. But it's too much of a jump, and it's not within the parameters of the natural progression of how things can be. In other words, it's stemming a little bit from a certain type of arrogance, a certain type of wanting things our way, wanting them now, and wanting them on our terms, and in a way really telling Hashem how we want things to be, jumping the gun. And you know what? That actually is a theme that runs through the entire Tanakh, and there are many examples of history. It's kind of a similar idea that we find also prevalent and discussed amongst our sages regarding the true nature of the sin of the golden calf, an idea of wanting things now, wanting things according to our expectations and our timetable and our understanding. And so really, it's important to understand that Nadav and Avihu were great men, and they were possessed of a tremendous burning desire for Hashem. And that's what drove them. But if we expect our religious experience to be real, if we want our relationship with God to be grounded and to be healthy and productive, and if we really want to achieve enlightenment and bring about a state of betterment for ourselves and for the world, then we have to realize, yes, Hashem does speak to us, but here is where He speaks to us, within the words of the Torah and within the framework of the mitzvot, the commandments. And that's where we find our expression, and we realize, yes, you know what? If we would but follow Hashem's word, indeed, the sky would open up for us, and we would see the same manifestation. We would understand in a very deep place within our very being exactly who Hashem is and what that relationship is. But we cannot take shortcuts. And what Nadav and Avihu were really doing was they were looking for an easier way, a shortcut. And you have to realize that as long as we follow Hashem's instructions, then we really can sanctify Him, and we really can find Him in every area of our lives. But let us understand that we cannot have things on our terms. We have to try as best as possible to follow His terms, because the very definition of our relationship with God, the very definition of a commandment, is that God commands and we do.